So there's like 3 different places that you can go to look for sampling issues. So let me just like really quick, this is going to be my standard surface. I'll give this another standard surface. So here's like default standard surface shaders for Arnold. I'm going to set this ball to be brushed metal, because why not? So if I go in and render this, hopefully this is going to be an ugly image. I'm shooting for ugly here. All right, so if you look at this, I'm gonna make this like a little bit darker, it'll show up better. All right, so like if you look at this ball, sorry, this is better as a Lambert. I'm specifically trying to like show errors, and this totally works better as a Lambert. So if you look at this, like clearly there's some grain in like the shadows, a little bit of grain like in these highlights right here. But there's also some grain just it might be hard to see on the projector, but if you look on the actual just like, you know, Lambert ground I've thrown in, there's a bit of grain there as well. So the first thing I usually look at, if I'm using an HDR as a texture, that's one of those things where I usually bump the sampling up in that specific light. So in this case, again, I'm just going to grab my light, and I am going to, you'll notice there's a little sample slider here. So I'll start this thing here. So if I bet this up, I usually start it at like 3. And if you go in, so you'll notice, again, hopefully that actually shows up on the projector. Kind of does. So like over here is my original render with 1 sample for the HDRI. This is with 3 samples, and you'll notice that the ground itself is like significantly smoother. You can see it also got rid of a little bit of sampling. Not a crazy, it didn't fix like all the sampling in the shadows, but it definitely helped with the sampling in the shadows. And it even fixed like some of the issues on the glass ball itself. So I find the HDRIs, again, usually on their own are a little bit grainy, so I will just bump the samples up to 3. The other thing, so if you have, again, I'm going to do a really ugly thing to like pull out a specific error. Where's my light? I don't know where I'm looking. Set this to like 15, like a crazy person. All right. So if you happen to have like an area light, I'm just going to demo this on like the brightest area light that's ever existed. But you'll notice, so like down here, again, weird example, but you can see that the shadow, there's a lot of grain around the edge, like a lot of it. That's something, so if I ever see grain in like a specific shadow in particular, especially around the edge of a shadow, that's something that you usually want to adjust the settings of in the individual light itself that is casting that shadow. So in this case, it's this horrific area light that I've just added in. And again, so I'm just going to start this weird little triangle thing, or this weird like area render. So if I look, again, just in the area light shape node where you edit the rest of the settings, you'll see another little sample slider here. If I set this to 3, you can see it does start smoothing out that edge a little bit. I set it to 5, it gets even smoother. Usually you probably wouldn't need to, this is like me trying 9 because I'm feeling insane. Usually you will not need to set these up to like 9. Usually 3 to 5 does it. It's just because I have my light so freakishly bright that it's causing extra errors. But, so that's the thing, again, where usually if you're having issues like in a particular shadow, that's like an individual light setting that you will need to look at. So any questions on that so far? All right. I'm going to hide that horrific area light that I've added in. And then I'm going to set this to be... So guys, if you guys ever notice grain, a lot of times it shows up in copper. It's just a like satisfying little ball. So if you ever notice, so if you scroll in here, you'll see there's like some weird, really weird, just like stray grain in here. And then the whole ball is like pretty sampley. And this is still with the HDR sample set to 3. So that's usually something that's like a specular, that's like issues with the specular highlights not rendering quite properly. which is something that I usually edit in the global settings for Maya. So if you go into render settings, there's a little Arnold tab. There's a similar thing in Redshift. Redshift usually requires like a little bit more twiddling. But if you're doing Arnold, just go into this Arnold render tab and you'll see there's all these like different sampling nodes that you can play with. So again, if you ever, it's especially common in like metal or like sometimes shiny plastic where you'll just get like a lot of grain where there's detail in your model. Take the specular highlight and just set it up to something more. So in this case, I'll set it to 10 to be like a just example thing. Again, this is like a little bit probably unnecessarily aggressive, but you can see that by doing that, there's a lot less noise in this area here. There's actually still a little bit of noise, but it's way better than it was. And then also if you, again, more samples kind of fix whatever that like original grainy area was. It's still like a little bit sampley, but it's just like slightly more diffuse and like way less noticeable than it used to be. The other things you might sometimes need to play with in these settings, honestly, I don't usually do much with this setting, like ever. Sometimes I play with it just to like see if it makes a difference, but usually just ends up slowing down my renders dramatically. It also would help if all my samples weren't set to 10. But I mean, you can see like by modifying that, it does actually, it's taking like way longer to render, but it does give me like a really nice sort of smooth area in there. I think this sort of like adjusts like the overall camera settings. I could be wrong, but the rest of these respond to like specific instances. So, like diffuse is just like if you have grain in your diffuse channel, so like a color. Specular again is highlights. If you ever have issues, like it looks like in your render here, where there is like this clear area, it looks like there might be a little bit of grain. So that's something where you might want to edit the transmission samples. So transmission is like for anything like glass, clear, pretty much anything where you're modifying transmission weight is when you would want to adjust that. SSS is for subsurface scattering. I'll probably end up going over that, not today, but like later. But subsurface scattering is like, if you ever, you're ever like looking at someone with the sun behind them and you can see like the red coming through their ear, that's subsurface scattering. It's basically if one light goes into an object, it bounces around, changes direction, and then like how it comes out affects the sort of color of the object. It's good for like skin stuff, or if you ever have like that, a lot of times actually the insides of pencils will have them, or like pens, those little like white plastic pieces will be sort of like a milky plastic that's not like quite solid. That's another instance where you might try subsurface scattering. So I should actually, I was gonna demo subsurface scattering. If you guys ever use that in your settings, you're probably gonna have to like jack the render settings up because it does usually take forever and a day to render. But I know like Jade uses a bit of subsurface scattering. Milk, I think, does. Milk? What?
No, I
Oh.
don't know why I think you were referring to a person.
Gotcha.
Jade.
This texture looks literally nothing like orange juice. Like sometimes I look at the presets and I'm just like, why? Like that looks so weird. I was having a personal vendetta against the honey shader the other day and I was like playing with honey and it was like a whole thing. If you guys, like, brief thing, if you guys ever want to play with subsurface scattering, you can see it's here. It's like, wait. Like you can't even tell, well, it also would help if I wasn't using a sphere, but.
How are you getting to that point? Like, are you clicking the surface shader of the object and going to...
Yep, it's just a tab right under transmission. There's another one for subsurface.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If I throw in a better it's like, spheres aren't great for demoing subsurface, but that is usually what you use if you want to get that sort of like milky texture, especially like wax. If you're trying to do like a wax candle, it's really good for stuff like that. But yeah, any questions on the sampling stuff I just went over? All right. Did that help answer your question? All right. I'm gonna assume that that's a yes. All right, so anyone else have questions about the project, want to volunteer it? I think I might do one more before continuing. All right, or we can just jump straight into ZBrush, what the heck. Because I'm feeling spazzy. All right.